I was reading a story that reminded me of an event from over 20 years ago. In the second half of 1998, I had taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. Being a kid, I usually worked one of the 3 shifts, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., and 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there were always 2 of us there from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for 6 months. I worked, saved, bought a car, and planned a move. By late March of '99, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working at all hours. At night he was a shadow, working with myself and another night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older, was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time I chalked it up to him being awkward, but that wouldn't last. One night near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word. Not sure what had occurred, I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask. During their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood shifted. She told me that she turned around only to find that he was right on her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing, and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said it would be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin with me each time. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. The next night came and went with no Calvin. I did the rounds while Amira stayed in the locked office. Same thing the night after. Then on my second to last shift, I come in to find her freaking out. She found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where he worked. That night and the next, Amira called the jail just to make sure that they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job. There's an article about his arrest in the description. It was an October night around 9 p.m, and I had spent a long day working as a hostess at a restaurant. One of my friends had asked me to help them out with getting a large amount of liquor for a party that was being thrown. Because I didn't really have time to get it all in one shopping trip, I went to 3 different liquor stores in a matter of 3 days, one each day. I ended up spending $180 on the liquor altogether, and they'd said they would pay me after I'd gotten it because they had no idea how much all of it would cost, and that they would add a tip, which was fine with me. At the last liquor store I went to, I hauled out the rest of the order to my car. This liquor store is in a very suburban area, so I felt completely safe, and I had been there countless times. As I'm putting the liquor into the trunk of my used cop car, I see out of the corner of my eye 2 men looking around and walking towards me. I acted like I hadn't seen them and minded my own business, but kept my peripheral gaze on them because I never fully let my guard down. "Could you give me a ride home?" one of the men wearing a black hoodie asked. "I'm actually very busy tonight and I have stuff that I gotta do when I get home," I replied. Trying to be as nice as I could, I told them, "There's a light rail right over there, and it's also where buses circulate." He came back at me with, Well, I don't really know where I'm going. So I told him, there are maps over by the light rail to show you its path. Him and his friend just looked at me, then they pulled up bandanas over their faces, revealing only their eyes. He then pulls up his shirt, which reveals a gun tucked into his waistband. I'm so stunned that I can't respond. All that's going through my mind is, oh my God, my parents are going to kill me for getting their car stolen. Eventually his friend says, I don't think she thinks we're serious. Put the gun to her head. He put the gun to my head, and this wave of shock hit my body, and it didn't feel real. A couple of seconds passed and my brain sort of begins functioning again, so I hand over my keys. As they are trying to figure out how to get into my car, I just stand there frozen for about 10 seconds, not able to comprehend that my car is being stolen by these men. They take a good 30 seconds to figure out how to turn the car on and learn the controls. While that's happening, I'm standing still as a rock because I'm thinking that they could just shoot me if I started to run. But then my mind tells me run, because they could take me with them and hold me hostage or God even knows what. I was holding my purse, which had my whole life in it, and I know it wasn't a good idea to do this, but it was convenient at the time. It had all my medications, money, and everyday things that I needed while I'm out doing stuff. I was trying my best to keep it out of sight on the back of me. All of these thoughts are rushing through my head for the next 20 seconds. All of a sudden, another man runs out of the store as the car is driving away, and he hops into the back of it. While I watch them quickly drive away, I slowly walk towards the liquor store, and as soon as they are out of sight, I start running to tell the liquor store employees about the incident. All the while, my body was shaking. I told the store manager to lock the door as I just had my car stolen at gunpoint, and this guy had the audacity to say, "What if we have customers?" The employee was obviously freaking out. He then runs towards the door to lock it and yelled, "Oh my God, what? This never happens here. This is crazy. What happened exactly?" I tried to tell him while my body and voice was shaking, and I start tearing up because of the shock. After I'm telling him this, he picks up the phone and tells me to call the police right away. The police come in less than a minute, and I give them my statement. The man I told my story to said that this kind of thing happens a lot, unfortunately, and it's very rare that they find whoever has done it. It's hard to determine what will happen to my car as well, as they'll just have to wait and see, which makes me feel so much better about everything. I tried calling my mother, my father, and my brother, but no one picked up as I was crying. I laughed a little bit because, of course, this type of thing would only happen to me. Although he had work early in the morning, I called my boyfriend because I didn't want to ride home in a police car. I needed to be with someone I knew and who I could talk to about it. When he picked up, he had been asleep and was annoyed with me at first, but then I explained the gist of what had happened, so I would be able to explain and go more in depth in person later. He didn't come in time, so I got driven home by the cops, and he met me at my house. Shortly after we got to my house, my parents got home and were in shock hearing about what had happened to me. We all sat around and talked about it until my boyfriend had to go home to get a proper amount of sleep. The next day I decided to drop my class that I wasn't doing well in anyway, because there was no way I was bouncing back after that, and I just needed some time to recuperate. I told my friend about all the liquor that was stolen, and by that I mean all $180 worth of liquor was stolen. They said that they felt so bad that they put me in that position, but obviously I reassured them that it wasn't their fault, but I had just spent $180 of my own money for them, and as long as they can pay me back for it, it'll be fine. There was a good amount of people that were chipping in for this party, and some of them didn't even want to repay the money to me because they believed it wasn't their fault, that I was dumb enough to get my car stolen. So why even give me money for liquor that I didn't have? Eventually they scraped the money together and paid me back a couple of days later. 5 days later they found my car ditched on the side of the road in the city. I had my car thoroughly cleaned after the incident, then I picked it up. When I got my car back, I had realized that these men had literally stolen everything, even the expensive textbooks that I had left in there for school that I was going to return. I had pushed down all my emotions for so long that a week later I had a breakdown, and I'm still not right because of what happened. To the gentlemen who are still out there that stole my car, let's never meet again. Before I begin, yes, I made a lot of dumb decisions. Yes, I should have probably called the police, but here it goes anyway. When I was around 15, I lived alone in a 2-story house. Although there were bedrooms upstairs, I would sleep on the living room couch. This was for 2 reasons. One, it was the central location of the house, so I could hear everything. And 2, it was equidistant from every exit. One night around 2 in the morning, I heard somebody jiggling the front doorknob. It was a slow, cautious jiggle, like they were trying to not be heard. When the door didn't open, they didn't stop. The jiggling slowly became less cautious and more irritated. They persisted for at least 2 minutes. They then went to the back door, which was also locked. I didn't want to call the police because I was an unemancipated minor living alone. I didn't want to be placed into foster care, and I didn't want my parents in trouble for neglect. Eventually, the jiggling stopped. I stayed up that night waiting for them to try other entrances, but nothing happened. A few nights passed and I awoke to the sound of a door opening upstairs. The doors in their house would really stick, so they took a lot of force to open. When you popped them loose, they made a loud scrape-pop shudder noise. At the time, I would take sleeping pills. It made it hard to fully awaken, and I'd sometimes only awaken with sleep paralysis. I couldn't determine whether I'd dreamt the sound or whether I'd awoken from it. I started to fall back to sleep and thought I heard the door close, like the grinding of wood rubbing together. Then the sound of bed springs screeching, like weight was being shifted. I thought, maybe somebody is homeless and they thought this was an abandoned house. I was super tired and wasn't even sure if I was actually conscious. I fell back to sleep again and then awoke to the feeling of somebody watching me. There were stairs parallel to the living room door, and I could see them from the couch. Halfway down the stairwell, I could see a long-haired man crouched over, looking at me. It was dark, and I felt like we were both trying to verify what we were seeing. I kept a metal baseball bat by the couch and grabbed it. Slowly, the man erected his body, and, without turning, backed up the stairs. I just listened for him to leave, or waited for him to come back down, but I heard neither. It was like he just stood at the top of the stairs waiting for me. I didn't go back to sleep. I heard nothing, even until sunrise. When I left for school that morning, I questioned what I'd actually experienced. I had my boyfriend over later that evening. As we approached the house, he pointed out that my window was open. I looked and the room to the sticking door was wide open. I told him what I'd experienced the night before, and he helped me check out the house. After finding nothing, I closed and locked the windows. I figured it must have been a hobo, and once they'd realized somebody was living there, they left. I still stayed there that night, but I didn't take sleeping pills. I awoke to the door opening again. This time I knew it was real. They knew somebody lived there, and yet they still returned. At this time in my life, I had little value for it. I had no fear of death because I knew where I'd go. I decided that I wasn't going to hide in my own house. I got my baseball bat, turned on the lights, and went upstairs. I yelled something like, "Listen, buddy, I'm coming up. Be out by the time I get there." I heard nothing and prepared for the worst. I checked the rooms and the closets, but I found nothing, and the windows were still closed. I checked the downstairs and found nothing as well. I felt pretty silly after finding nothing, but I still stayed up that night regardless. I got ready for school the next morning and saw that the window was open again. It then occurred to me that I hadn't checked under the beds when I'd done the search. I didn't have my bat with me, so I bailed. To think that an intruder was possibly hiding under the bed as I searched the house is really spooky, but I'm partially relieved that I hadn't checked. If I'd have bent down and come face to face with a man beneath my bed, the story may have ended differently. So, to whoever watched me sleep from the stairs, returned the next night and watched me search my house from beneath my bed, not cool. Let's not meet. Many years ago on my birthday, I think it was my 12th or 14th, I can't quite remember now. I didn't have many friends, except one in particular, another girl, the same age as me, who shared my first name. We decided to have a nice dinner and some cake at my house, and that we would play in my room until dinner was ready. It was a Saturday at 4:30 p.m. Harry Potter was a favourite book of ours, so we were both reading our copies whilst listening to some music on my CD player. We didn't have it up loud because I knew our neighbour, who lived in the flat below us, couldn't stand loud music. Since we didn't want to upset her, we kept it very low. There were a few moments in the following half hour when we would giggle at something happening in the books, and maybe discuss it a little, but we weren't shouting or anything. If we had done, my mother would have told us to quieten down. As it gets to 5 p.m, we hear someone start hammering on our front door. They are screaming and yelling. It was like someone was being murdered on our doorstep. I immediately turn off the CD player, and my friend and I hide under the bed. There's a slight pause where my mother yells out through the door for whoever it is to stop and go away. The neighbour, whose voice I now recognise, starts up again, along with the sounds of her attempting to kick in our door. She screams about how we all have to be quiet because she has a migraine, and how if we don't, she will come in and slit my throat in front of my mother. This is when my mother calls the police. I crawled out from under my bed and peeked out the door to see if she's coming in. We are on the top floor, and the only way out is through that door. We have nowhere to go if she comes in. The bottom corner of the door has buckled inwards, and my mum is shoving her full weight against the door. The house phone cord stretched so she can remain on the phone with the police. She waves for me to retrieve my brother and for us to go lock ourselves in the bathroom. We run across the flat, grab my little brother, and once in the bathroom, lock the door, sit in the tub, and cry. The banging and yelling went on for so long. The police always took forever to get to where we lived, and it wasn't a good neighbourhood. I couldn't say exactly how long it went on, but it eventually went silent. After a long time of sitting in silence, we could hear footsteps approaching the bathroom door, and still terrified out of our minds, we all begin crying again. Then my mother talks to us through the door. Everything is fine now, but we're going to my grandmother's house. My friend gets taken home after her mum picks her up, and we pack clothes for the night and hop in the car. When we came back the next day, there was a new front door and extra locks on the inside. We lived in that flat with that woman in the one directly below us for 7 more years. Even now, when I see her in the street, I still get a shiver of fear down my spine. When I was a junior in high school, I was quite an odd kid. I liked having colourful hair, piercings, and all that kind of stuff. The school I went to was near Atlanta, so there weren't many people like me. I tried to find friends that liked the same kind of music and other interests, and I could normally kind of brush off any weird energy that people gave off and just ignore it. I just wanted friends. One day I was in the gym hanging out with a group of weirdos, and there was a guy that I hadn't seen before. He was wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt and jeans that looked a size too small. His name was Ernest. We immediately clicked with each other in a platonic way, and we laughed at a lot of the same things. We started hanging out in the gym together every day, people watching and making fun of those of them that would play basketball. It wasn't too long until he started making fun of my appearance and making me feel absolutely terrible about myself. I had really bad acne in high school, and he joked about it, saying that I had meth skin. First strike. Me being me though, I kept hanging out with him, and eventually it led to hanging out after school as well. He would invite me over to his house, and we only stayed in his room. He refused to let me meet his family. His parents didn't really speak English, but I still wanted to meet them anyway. I always thought it was weird that Ernest didn't know Spanish, but his siblings did. And when he could speak words, it sounded Russian. He pretty much only played It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia on TV, would ramble on about superheroes, and would always come up with these strange scenarios where he was an evil villain and how much power he would have. Fast forward a while. I get a job at a pizza place, and Ernest gets the same job at the same pizza place. So, inevitably, we were always together. Always. He pretty much never let me out of his sight. It got to the point where he would take me to school every day in his PT Cruiser, and I still get chills now every time I see one of those damn shoe-shaped ass cars. Then we started skipping school. A lot. I mean, we pretty much went to school only 2 or 3 times a week. This is where it starts to get pretty bad. He started pressuring me to do sexual things with him. I don't really want to get into details because it's pretty disturbing, but he manipulated the situation in such a way that I felt like we were in a relationship because I thought that I needed him. He really convinced me that we were a couple, but I was so repulsed by him that I could never fully accept it. He started telling our other friends that he had had sex with me and that we were in a relationship. I denied it all. To this day I deny it. I've lied to therapists and I've lied to my friends, but right now, I'm coming clean about it all. At one point, he'd ended up living with me and my family, sleeping in the same room as me. He had convinced my entire family that he was gay so that he could live with me. He literally dressed up in pink and put a scarf around his neck and pranced around my arm, trying to win her over with his fake personality. I was so used to living in chaos that this was barely a problem for me. During all of this, he was a rude piece of shit to me. I remember asking him for a ride one day and he said no, for no good reason. I started getting really pissed off because he couldn't actually give me a reason. He just kept smirking at me. He did this type of thing frequently. One night we were sitting in the living room and he silently gets up and drives off somewhere. Then he came back, walked through to the living room doorway, stared at me for about 15 seconds and walked into my bedroom. I then could hear a bunch of rustling, so I stormed in there thinking he was up to something sketchy. He'd gotten completely dressed into his sleep pants, with his hand in his pocket. I noticed he wouldn't take his hand out of his pocket, and at this point I'm getting scared, so I force my hand into his pocket and discover he has a knife. I don't remember how things were after that night for a while. Fast forward again, I'm at a best friend Kayla's birthday party, and everyone is camping in the backyard. Ernest hated Kayla because she was a way out for me in his perspective. She got in the way of us. I'm sweating typing this out because this is probably one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. The sequence of events is a little bit blurry, but I remember it. I had made it clear to Ernest at this point that we were not a thing. and that he needed to let go of that fantasy. I had a crush on another boy named John, and we slept in the same tent together that night. Morning came and I could hear Ernest outside asking people if they knew where I was. Someone said, "She's in the tent with John." I was immediately terrified. I knew something bad was about to happen. The tent rips open, I don't have a shirt on, and he begins screaming as loud as he can, cussing all of us out and just pitching an absolute fit. He then storms off, goes to his car, calls me and tells me to get to the car now. Everyone there was completely freaked out, and Kayla advised me not to go to the car because she knew how scary Ernest was just generally. I didn't want anyone to be uncomfortable, so I figured that if I went to the car it would ease everyone just a little that he wasn't there. I went. As soon as the car door closed, we sped off. Fast. Really fast. I looked over at him, wide-eyed, and he is screaming and crying with absolutely no expression in his face, tears streaming, but emotionless. He said to me, "You were supposed to love me," over and over and over again. He starts speeding faster and said, "If I can't love you, then no one else can." I'm actively having a straight-up panic attack in the passenger seat. I can't hear because my ears are ringing, and I can't see a thing. Meanwhile, Kayla had already called my mum, and somehow my mum left the house fast enough to track us down in that PT Cruiser. He parked at a church and my mum was watching us. Ernest had a box cutter at his side, and I got a call from my mum. I can't really remember what she said, but I know it was something along the lines of, "I'm gonna slit your fucking throat," to Ernest. He started coming to his senses, if you can even call it that, and dropped me back off at Kayla's, and told me that he was going to kill himself after he dropped me off. Kayla and I were frantically trying to call his parents about a possible imminent suicide, but they couldn't speak English. He called the police on himself because he thought he was going to harm himself or someone else. He was gone for a couple of weeks, and when he came back, he was parked outside my school, waiting for me to come out. He ran up to me. I noticed that he had on a plaid button-up shirt, and it was tucked into his pants, which I found extremely odd, and I knew immediately that this was a fake personality. He was speaking differently as well, almost proper, like a few weeks had turned him into a saint. It wasn't long after that I had admitted myself into a mental institution, because I just kept having breakdowns. Everyone in the groups told me to get rid of him, and I had not realised how serious this was until I saw everyone's reactions to the stories. I have so many stories about this psycho, but I can't type it all out. I did get rid of him eventually, and I found new friends. Without them, I don't know how this would have gone. I haven't seen or spoken to him in about 3 years. Let's not meet Ernest ever again. I used to live in a trailer, and I lived in it for most of my life. We moved there after my grandmother died and lived there for about 14 years. I was always picked on by the neighbours, so I didn't ever want to leave the house when people were outside. When I found out we were moving, I was ecstatic. You mean I'll actually be able to go out and get some air without being confronted with people mooing at me? Sign me the hell up. We moved to a town over to this long street, so I would have plenty of space to walk around if I wanted. Seeing as how I was new to the place and bored out of my skull, not having everything of mine moved yet, I invited a friend over and we went walking along that street. We saw one of the neighbours a few houses down washing his bright red truck. He stopped what he was doing to make conversation, asking if we'd just moved in, etc. Nothing unusual or seemed off about the guy. A few weeks passed and I'm walking down that street again. I am confronted by the same guy. "Hey, you want a job?" he asks. "It pays $20 an hour." No, I replied. Considering this is the second time I've ever spoken to this guy. No, I don't want your shady-ass job. Visibly not having any of this, I tried to get out of the conversation without too much fuss. I figured that would be the end of it, as he had probably sensed that the guy he'd met twice was really not comfortable talking to him, so he should leave him alone. Wrong. A while later, I passed by his house again. He isn't outside this time. I go for a short walk, and when I come back the way I came, there he is. He's out on his front porch smoking a cigarette. He asks me if I've thought about his job offer, and I say, "No, I'm still thinking about it." To which he starts grilling me. "For $20 an hour? What's there to think about?" After clearly not wanting anything to do with this, he threatens to report me. For what? The only thing I've been able to think it might have been is unemployment, which given I'm not on, I would say they wouldn't care. Winter strikes and it's about 9 p.m, and I'm going stir crazy being inside. I need some air. I don't want to walk all the way down the hill that I live on because I don't want to risk slipping and falling, so reluctantly I walk my street. When passing by that guy's house, I see him staring out of his window. I pass by his house a few more times before getting creeped out and heading to the other side of the street. After walking around there for a little while, I see this guy, from afar, come running out of his house, stopping on the street and looking for something. I stand in the dark waiting for him to go back inside. Don't ask me why I did this, because to be perfectly honest, I still kick myself for it to this day. I decided to walk that road one more time just to get the rest of my energy out of my system. Then I would head back inside and not think about this creepy mofo ever again. Passing by his house, he was still staring out of his window. After I'd fully passed by his house, he came out for a cigarette. I deliberately tried to avoid him. I noticed that he pulled on the screen door of his house as it makes a lot of noise, so I heard the door open. Not being an idiot, I knew he did this to make me think he'd gone back inside. I thought, alright, enough of this fucking shit. I'll just walk past and go home. Of course he tried to talk to me about the job offer he had made. You could afford shoes that fit you if you had that job of mine. I had been wearing shoes I'd gotten from a friend because no one else in their house was using them. They were big old winter boots. I ignored him, after which he then starts swearing at me. I have totally stopped walking on that road now. However, my mum had seen him pulling up to me when her and I were bringing laundry out to the car. Upon seeing me, he slows to a seeming stop and looks as if he wants to say something. Upon seeing my mum, he decides that it wouldn't be a good idea and drives off. I don't plan on walking this road again, if I don't have to. His truck is usually gone during the week, so I figured I was safe going out. I prefer to walk that road as it's much faster way to get into town, and when I do, I definitely try to have music blaring through my headphones, just in case he is there, so I don't notice him and I can carry on with my day without even thinking about this gigantic creep that lives down the road. So creepy guy that keeps offering me a job, you can take that job and shove it up your ass. Let's not meet again, you fucking weirdo. This event happened within the last month and still chills me to the core whenever I think of the details, or leave my brother's apartment for that matter. My brothers live in a small apartment building in a very small Midwestern town, the kind of town that if you have no business there, you'd really have no reason to know it exists. The building they live in is a long, single-level building. Tenants park on the street and then walk up a ramped deck that wraps around the back of the building, where the 3 apartments all have their own door. It's pretty dark leaving their place until you get to the street, where there are obviously street lamps. This town of a 600-person population has no reason to be afraid, although there are occasionally items stolen from cars or garages, as everyone, not me, seems to keep their things unlocked. I usually feel tense when leaving their place, but solely because I run on the side of paranoid and have a penchant for horror films, and I believe bad news can reach out and grab anyone at any time. I'm a 6'5", 29-year-old male, and I always carry a knife. In fact, I feel strange without one. My brothers and I were bullshitting while passing the controller playing GTA 5. You know, create chaos, pass it when you die. My girlfriend was calling fairly frequently, and I hate answering the phone around people. Being that it was getting late, I decided to head to my car and call her back there. That night it was probably somewhere between 25 to 30 degrees, so not unbearable for Midwesterners, but no doubt cold. I remember there was little to no wind, so it was very quiet. I usually walk to my car with my knife in hand, again out of paranoia. Not that I'm looking to shank any of the other 2 tenants who could and have surprised me coming around the corner on their way home and my way out. I got into my car and noticed nothing out of the ordinary. I was parked underneath the streetlight, so the majority of the area was well lit. There was a patch of darkness behind my car, where another tenant was parked directly behind me. I fired up my sexy Buick Park Avenue and let it run for a while, whilst I called my girlfriend back. We are talking for a good half an hour to 40 minutes, before I heard what sounded like something hitting my passenger window or brushing my door. This put me on high alert as I turned my head quickly, but I saw nothing but darkness running up the creek. I then looked behind me and saw nothing but the vehicle that was already parked behind me. I mentioned this to my girlfriend as I realized that with my car thawing out, some of the ice stuck on the doors had probably fallen. As our conversation continued, I heard another similar sound from what sounded like my back door, and then my driver door. Eventually, I caught a chunk of ice with my own eyes fall from my side mirror, and rest assured, that's all it was. It's now been north of an hour, right, and it's fucking cold out. My car is really warm though, and with my phone about to die, I told my girlfriend that I'll call her back once I got home and put it on charge. Now the distance from the curb to the stop sign at the end of the street is about 20 to 30 feet away, so I shift into D and roll forward before applying my brakes at the stop sign. I did a double take in my rear view and just about threw up on my dashboard. Under the streetlight, now drenched in the red hue of my back lights, I could see a balled up black mass slowly start to uncoil. I turned and looked with my own eyes, and behind me, sure enough, a figure in all fucking black is now standing in front of the other tenant's vehicle that was behind mine. I remain at the stop sign wondering if I'm seeing what I'm seeing, not blinking and holding my breath. Whoever I was looking at just stood there for a minute, with their body turned sideways and their head turned looking at me. I'm talking all black, It was difficult to even distinguish features. I thought I could make out either a face mask or a scarf wrapped around their head. Then he suddenly turns and casually starts to walk in the other direction. I could make out that he was holding something that looked a lot like a pipe or tire iron, maybe a large wrench. He was definitely holding something. He just kind of turned slowly and meandered down the block. I freaked out internally and finally took my left turn, then sped up the main street. I go 1 block and cut down past the local taverns, then another right, hoping to catch this ghoulish figure walking this way. I was fucking chilled to the bone, but right then I felt like the goddamn neighborhood watch. I peered into backyards and saw nothing. This guy had just disappeared. I noticed a few porch motion lights shine onto neighbors' lawns, and this freaked me out because you could almost follow the path he took into the alleyway. I never found the guy. I later on wondered about any of the neighbors, but they are all elderly folks. The majority of the damn town is elderly folk. I don't have a single clue who it could have been and what they were doing. Like I said, I still think the sounds I was hearing were simply ice melting from my doors, but it was fucking cold out for a man to be sitting outside a running car while I'm just there talking on the phone. My brothers and I talked about this a few nights later for hours, trying to come up with a reason for the person to be doing what they were doing. What kind of creep sits outside a running car in 30-degree temperatures with every opportunity to strike, and then once I leave just slips into the night? This incident, in my opinion, just tenfold justifies my reasons for paranoia and why no town is safe. If there are people, there is potential for conflict. I mean, man is the most dangerous animal, after all. This happened about 3 years ago, right at the height of Pokemon Go's popularity. I played it regularly with my fiancé, Luke. We decided to get clever, and instead of walking to make our eggs grow or whatever, I would just drive around the residential streets slowly, about 15 miles per hour. We always drove the same path, and we did this several times. At the time, we lived in a very small, one-traffic light town. The town was primarily low-income families. We usually played Pokemon at about 10 or 11 p.m, as did several other locals. Without other entertainment, it was a fairly popular game around town. This particular night, I'm driving the normal path with Luke. We are catching sick Pokemon left and right, and hatching eggs like crazy. We paused in the water department's parking lot to catch our 217th Ekans. We drive for about 10 more minutes and park next to an empty lot. Across the street is a normal residential landscape with houses and whatnot. I'm catching my first Pikachu, which I'm stoked as fuck about, and some guy drives by in a beat-up silver SUV. He slows down and asks me if I'm okay. I smiled and flashed my phone screen and told him we were playing Pokemon. He said something like, "Okay, have a good one." But he seemed weird. I don't know. So we leave and make our last loop around the neighborhood, pausing as we go to collect various Pokemon. About 15 minutes later, we are back by the empty lot because there's another Pokemon. Suddenly, the house across the street starts pointing beams of light at me, very small and bright. It was weird, so Luke and I noped out of there, and as soon as we did, the beat-up silver SUV is behind me, and I didn't even see where he'd come from. I turned onto the main road to head home, and I didn't even realize anything was wrong at first. He pulled up next to me, and I can only see a male driving and a female passenger. The driver is shining a blinding light at me through his window as we drive. At this point, I'm simply pissed. I keep asking Luke what this guy's fucking problem is, and I'm telling him to tell the guy to fuck off. All the while, I'm becoming petrified. I am a confident person, but I'm not a confident driver, and I had no idea why these people were fucking with us, but I do know that it's the same guy that asked if I was okay earlier. I don't want to drive home because I don't want to lead these people to my house, but I had no idea what to do. I decided to drive to the police station, but there was no one there. Parking lot empty and lights off. We have 2 police officers, so they both must have been out patrolling. I was shaking. I was raised in a large city, so tiny town living and no police at the fucking police station was so foreign to me, I had no clue what to do. So I drove to the little hospital and managed to lose them. My fiancé and I immediately changed seats without speaking. We sat there for about 15 seconds and then pulled out. He's now behind us again, and he has become aggressive. I call 911 at this point and begin crying to dispatch, telling them that a crazy guy is following us. At this point, Luke is flying through the town at random. He's running red lights, speeding 70 plus in residential areas, and tearing through people's lawns. This was seriously as insane as it sounds. Everywhere we went, he went too. Every time we sped up, he did too. We had no idea what he wanted, but we knew he wanted to hurt us. We could feel it. At one point we were tearing through yards, no fences, and the guy manages to box us in. I'm still on the phone with 911. We are stuck between his car and a copse of trees. Immediately upon stopping, the guy jumps out, as does his female passenger and two very large male passengers in the back seat. Luke immediately pulls out his gun, points it at them and screams, "Get the fuck back! Get the fuck back!" They all bolt back to their vehicle and take off. I am shaking and sobbing at this point, talking to 911, and the lady finally asks me where I want the cops to meet me. I tell her the local gas station. We are there within 20 seconds, as are the cops. This town is seriously so little, I don't know how the cops didn't see us or intervene while we destroyed dozens of yards at midnight and drove extremely fast and recklessly. Seconds after we pull in, so does the SUV. The guy jumps out and begins to rush my car. Cops stop him and they talk to him for a while. We are just sitting in our car, shaking. An older cop finally walks over to talk to us and says, "So, did one of you pull a gun on him tonight?" We were shocked. That is the only thing he asked us? We told him yes and explained everything that had happened. The cops went and talked to him again, came back and basically said that the guy thought we were casing his house because he kept seeing our vehicle pass it. The cop told us we were lucky that he decided not to press charges because Luke pulled his gun. My car had a decent amount of damage from driving through trees and bushes and shit. It was scratched up, and we were pretty sure the guys were going to beat our asses, and the cops tell us we are lucky? We were so scared and shaken up. We didn't argue with anything and left when they allowed us to. But not before they ran all our info and made us feel like criminals, like we were childish and stupid for playing Pokemon. The cops openly laughed at us. We went home and literally stayed up all night long, taking turns in peeking out of our window. We were convinced they were going to drive around, find my car and harass us. The next day we had a high-tech security system installed. I have since seen the guy and the girl several times. I worked at the school and they had young children. I had never seen or interacted with them prior to this day, or after, but I know they knew who I was, so I'm glad I don't live there anymore. I also never played Pokemon Go ever again after that night. I should also mention that I understand why the guy thought what he did, but I do not think his reaction was justifiable. I've been a long-time lurker of the tag, but this is my first post. I've been deliberating for months on whether to post this story, but I've finally decided to make an anonymous account. As far as I know, the situation should be over, and I hope to never need to make an update story-wise. Now, this story spans over nearly 2 years, so brace yourself for a particularly long story. For background, I'm a notorious people pleaser and a goody two-shoes who typically can't stand up for myself because I don't like conflict. It doesn't help I'm a petite 5'3" girl who can't intimidate anyone for the life of me. This all makes me at least appear very naive and vulnerable, so I suppose this added to the incidents. Another important note is that I'm a music major, my focus being voice as a classical operatic trained soprano. This whole story started in the fall of 2017. I was fresh out of high school and starting my first semester at a local community college. I wasn't able to attend the university. I was accepted to for personal reasons, but that's another day and another tag. A month into the semester, I saw the school was advertising auditions for a college-wide singing competition called University Idol. I auditioned on my home campus. There's 6 campuses across the state. In October, with Francis D'Ambrosio's version of Danny Boy, and found myself moving forward to the semi-finals round the next month. This round of auditions was hosted on the main arts music campus, an hour away from my home, which I was somewhat familiar with, since I took music theory at that location. I sang Think of Me from the Phantom of the Opera, and the day before my 19th birthday in December, I received the email that I had been selected for the top 10 finalists to officially compete for the title of University Idol. This required more on-site rehearsal and preparation from all the contestants in order for us to all prepare our songs and the group introductory number with a coach provided from the school, so the finale was to be hosted at the end of spring 2018 semester. I went into my second semester feeling a little more adjusted to college and prepared for this competition. I took more and more classes on the music campus from that spring onwards. This semester was my music theory second, and now a piano class as well. Music majors were required to have a minor instrument as well as a basic piano proficiency skills, so I thought I'd knock out 2 birds with 1 stone with the class. Little did I know that it would be here that I'd meet the man who would change my college life for the rest of my time at this school. His name was Bob. At my college, senior citizens over a certain age, I'm not sure if it's 60 or 65, could take a handful of college credits for free each semester. Some had even gotten full degrees this way. Bob was one of these senior audit students, and the 2 of us took that same piano class that semester. At first I didn't think much of him. He seemed like a weird old man who tried too hard to fit in with the younger students, even though there were several students there his own age. He'd butt into our conversations from time to time, overtaking it and wasting what little break time we had, but we all shrugged it off. It seemed especially odd to me that he'd single me out for conversations during breaks, especially since I usually used that time to practice individual repertoire on top of the exercises that our professor gave to us. One day I brought up my singing competition. Several of my classmates had auditioned, but I was the only one to be selected for the finals. In fact, I was the only music major who had made it that far in the competition period. I mentioned that I was trying to get people to go to the performance to support and vote for me. Seeing as the audience vote accounted for half of the weight of our final placements and what amount of prize money we could win, Bob jumped in like clockwork, saying he'd spread the word around his other classes and would get a group together to come support me, and I thanked him. I needed all the support I could get after all, so what harm could it do to invite a slightly strange man from one of my classes? The rest of the semester leading up to the show went by as normal as it could have gone, and Bob seemed to grow more and more excited the closer the performance got. Finally, in April 2018, the finale came and the 10 of us performed our hearts out. I sang Love Never Dies by Andrew Lloyd Webber for my competition piece, receiving a standing ovation from the audience and judges alike to my delight. I had told my family before the competition that I could see myself taking a place in the top 3, but not winning because of my genre choice. While people would say they'd like my singing, they'd also likely say that opera wasn't really their style. And per my prediction, I won second place, as well as the second place prize. The top 3 were asked to stay longer for some pictures and to fill out paperwork for our prize money, while the other 7 went back to the dressing rooms to get their belongings and change. This took some time as judges and our accompanying band members came up and congratulated us, talking about what we planned on doing with our talent and prizes. All in all, it was quite some time before I was able to go back to the dressing room myself, and I was one of the last contestants to leave the backstage. I finally came out of the stage door, my hands completely full from lugging my competition dress and other belongings with me, and I take no more than 2 steps toward my friends and family when Bob rushes up and intercepts me. He starts going on and on about the competition, how I should have won, and ranting about the girl who won first, and how he used 2 voting slips instead of just 1 to vote for me, which I'm taken aback about, because if I were to have won, I would have wanted to earn it fairly, not from someone cheating and voting multiple times. It's been several minutes now, and my family are looking confused and concerned about the old man monopolizing my time, so I try to excuse myself as politely as possible and head past him. My family are ecstatic for me, getting second place, and we spend the rest of the time at the venue taking pictures and chatting about amazing or funny moments from the show. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Bob hovering on the edge of my social circle, but I try to put him from my mind, talking to my friends and thanking them for coming to support me, trying to fill the time so he might get the hint and leave. My family and friends and I arrange who's driving, since I picked up 2 friends on the way to the competition, and I'm now rightfully exhausted. I've been outside for nearly 45 minutes now, and when I turn to make sure I haven't left anything behind, I see the entire audience except for the close family of the 2 other top 3 have finally left, all except for Bob, who has been watching my exchange with my loved ones for the entire time now, I realise. I bid him and everyone else not driving with me goodnight and head home. My parents asked who he was, and I just said some old guy from one of my classes. Fall 2018. I ran into some schedule conflicts with my music theory 3rd class, so I ended up having to take my choir class on the music campus, as well as my required theory class, instead of my home campus, like I'd been doing the previous 2 semesters. I was relieved to find I didn't have any classes with Bob, but he mainly uses his free credits to take music classes, so he was in the same buildings a lot. The semester goes by as normal, and days before my 20th birthday, I'm preparing for our winter concert. I was a featured soloist in a Schubert piece, but I was nervous because I had lost my voice to illness a week before the concert, and there was no one to replace me for this solo. I'm especially nervous because in our last rehearsal, my voice gave out on me halfway through my solo, and I desperately don't want that to happen tonight. I show up early to the concert hall, having walked there from a previous class a few buildings over, and I see Bob is also early despite not being in any of the ensembles performing that night. I decide to ignore him so I can change into my concert dress and focus on keeping my voice in shape, since I was still feeling a little sick. Our performance comes and goes, and despite having rising fever and growing lightheadedness several times on stage, I'm able to successfully perform the entire program, including my Schubert solo. Audience members congratulate me on my performance, while I wait in the lobby for my parents to bring both their and my cars around, since I'm no longer in a state to be driving after exerting myself and making my fading illness flare up again. While I wait, I quietly converse with my classmates and friends, and Bob finds a way to insert himself once again. He tunes out my friends and turns to me, going on again about the performance. At one point he mentions getting pictures of me with the choir, and it was here I noticed the camera casing hanging off of his shoulder. I was a little confused, considering there were professional photographers at the concert already for newsletters and ads for the school. I wondered what use he had to take pictures of the ensembles, especially since he hardly knew anyone performing, besides me and a handful of others. I tried shrugging it off, figuring it was just the fever making my head fuzzy, and assumed he meant he had pictures of the choir that would have me in them by default. He starts going on about a nearby restaurant that the ensembles and directors went to after every performance, saying he'll save me a table together. But I tell him and my friends that I can't go, because I desperately need to get home and get some rest and medicine. He looked disappointed as my parents pulled up then, and I went home trying not to focus on anything but rest and my last few finals. Spring 2019 seemed to be the semester where everything clicked into place in the worst possible way. I was both excited and stressed about the semester, since I was finally graduating with my associate's degree, and found out in October I would be performing at the Sydney Opera House over the summer. On top of this, I was also cast in the spring play on my home campus, so juggling maintaining my perfect GPA to try and transfer schools in the fall, learning lines and blocking, preparing repertoire for a required end-of-degree solo recital, and fundraising to send myself to Australia, I was already a little stressed as it was about the semester. I got lucky again to not have any classes with Bob, but he took a lower-level music theory class in the same room before my own Theory 5 class on Mondays and Wednesdays. So when I showed up early to study and do homework, he was still in the room packing his things or practicing on one of the keyboards. I had to find time outside of classes to come to this lab because there was homework that we had to do weekly using a special computer program. Other semesters I was able to do these assignments at home using a cloud version, but this semester the school's cloud code for this program expired and wouldn't be renewed until the fall, so I had no choice but to add time into my schedule to do it on campus. Every time I came in, Bob would drop whatever he was doing to come to me and start trying to talk to me. At first I humoured him, listening to him rambling about whatever he could think of to keep the one-sided conversation going before trying to politely excuse myself to do my assignments. Sometimes he waited in case I finished early so he could try to continue talking before my class started, and my professor would have to ask for him to leave so he could begin to teach. But as he did it every single time he saw me, particularly when I was alone, it started unnerving me more and more, to the point where I'd come in and start my homework as fast as possible, putting my headphones on so I could do my ear training and try to ignore him. He'd then start trying to talk, even as I did this, trying to interrupt me even when I told him blatantly that I needed to do my homework, and I couldn't focus when he was trying to talk to me. He got so bold about this that I started altering my schedule, coming in later and staying after class instead to do my assignments, leaving me to rush from the music campus to my home campus to get to my choir rehearsals on time on Mondays. Anything so I didn't have to see him. As the semester went on, I was nearly late to class every day, coming in at the same time as the professor because I didn't want to see this man. One day earlier in the semester, when I still attempted to do my assignment before class, I had finished early and was able to talk to my classmates for once. They had come in around the same time as me for once, so Bob didn't try to come up to me for once. We talked about homework and other things, and I eventually mentioned the play I was in on my home campus and a few of the show times. It was here that Bob rushed from his spot at the back of the room to the front with the rest of us. He never spoke to my other classmates, asking me directly about the play and saying again he'd get a group from the music campus to go see it. I reluctantly told him the show times, because at that point he could just go on the college website and look them up himself, since he had heard which campus it was on, and hopefully he'd spoken true about coming in a group rather than him alone. Come April, our rehearsals were wrapping up and our shows had finally begun. My parents had come to opening night, and everyone seemed to love the murder mystery comedy we were putting on, so I was in high spirits for the show. In fact, I had all but forgotten Bob's promise to come to the show. One of our Friday evening shows, the whole cast was feeling great, and we had a wonderfully responsive audience. Intermission came around, and the cast all went back into the green room to fix makeup, change into second act costumes, or just take a breather. Our director came in shortly after, and I thought it was just for our typical quick notes for Act 2. Instead he came directly to me and pulled me aside to ask me if I knew who the old man was he had caught taking pictures of me. My blood ran cold as my classmates came over, having overheard and seen my reaction. My director was especially concerned because the man wasn't taking pictures of the show as a whole, and he had only taken pictures of me during my scenes. I explained that it might be Bob, mentioning how he said he might be coming to a show. I explained some of the things he had been doing that semester and how I had had to change my schedule to try to avoid him. It was here that one of my classmates suggested his behaviour was borderline stalking at this point. My castmates all said they'd keep an eye on him during the performance, and my director said he'd spoken with him, since film and photography of the show was not allowed, and he knew because my director made that announcement before every single show. We went into the second half, and it was lucky for me that my character spent nearly the remainder of the show nervous and distressed, since I was now paranoid every time I went on stage. I tried seeing if I could spot Bob and confirm it was him, but it was too dark for me to make out exact faces beyond the first few rows. I thought I'd be able to see better when I went onto the second floor of the stage, since I ended the show as a ghost, but it was still too dark, until we did our final bows and the house lights went up. There in the back I could make out Bob's face, and I couldn't even tell my castmates it really was him until we were completely finished with the show, because I was the first to take a bow. I told my other castmates, who also ended the show upstairs, that I could confirm it was Bob, as we were heading downstairs backstage, and my male castmate Will, who also ended the show as a ghost, said he'd stay by me until the audience had left. After every show, the cast would stand next to the doors so we could thank the audience for coming, and to see friends and family who had come, and just to mingle with them in general about the show. Since Bob sat in the back only a few seats from the doors, he should have been one of the first out of the theatre. Instead, he walked all the way to the end of the line and made himself the last person we would have to talk to. He ignored the rest of my castmates and made a beeline for me, even though I was very visibly uncomfortable at his approach. Will stood half in front of me, just staring down at Bob with an unamused expression, clearly trying to shield me from the old man who was trying to start his spiel so he could stand there talking at me for ages. My director was finally able to get between the three of us and thanked Bob for coming, then asked him to leave the theatre so we could reset for the next show. I tried to breathe a little easier, thinking the worst was over and he was gone. So I went about resetting my props. As I was putting a small table I used back into place, I heard Will behind me say loudly, "Yeah, can I help you?" When I turned around, I saw Bob was hovering just outside the doors of the theatre, watching me, all alone since the rest of the audience had left, as they should have. We closed the doors on him, and my director immediately came to me because I was close to tears from anxiety now. He asked if I wanted to call the campus police, and I said if he was still standing out there when we were finished cleaning and changing, yes, but if he wasn't, then I was going to confront him myself the next time I saw him. Half an hour later we had finally finished, having taken our time to see just how long Bob might wait out there. I asked a castmate if he could look outside the doors to see if Bob was still there, and he told me he had finally left. My director asked if someone would walk me to my car, since it was well past sundown now, and we were some of the last people on campus. Bless their hearts, my entire cast walked me to my car that night, and made me check into our group chat when I got home from shows from that point forward. I was paranoid of every car behind me on my drive home, fearing that Bob might have waited in the parking lot and could have followed me. When I got home, I broke down to my parents and told them about my concerns, and they made me swear to call them if he ever came near me again. Monday I got lucky. Since I had changed my schedule to where I'd show up right as class started and stay late to do homework instead, I didn't see him at all. I had nearly made myself late waiting in my car before going into the building, trying to get over my paranoia so I wouldn't miss class, since it would affect our grades if we were late too often or missed too many classes. Wednesday I wasn't so lucky. It was after my music theory class, and I had a few hours before music history, and I was sitting in a little commons area with my classmates and my friend Maya that I drove there on Wednesdays since it was her first semester on the music and arts campus. Most of us were studying for a quiz in music history, and I had just finished a phone interview for a presentation in another class when I saw Bob out of the corner of my eye. He was heading towards the doors to the parking garage, a straight path ahead of him, and I tried ducking a little lower in my chair so he wouldn't see me. It was no use though, because as soon as he saw me he changed course. Mind you, I look very clearly busy. I've got a paper with interview notes out. He just saw me get off a phone call. I have my textbook open in my lap. It didn't matter to him though, because he pushed past my friends and classmates to be standing before me where I was cornered in my chair, and immediately started talking at me once again. He was saying how wonderful I was in the play, and how he had just seen a musical over the weekend where I would have been perfect for every character. It was when he started saying I should audition for a theatre company near where he lived that something in me kind of snapped. I cut him off, asking why he had taken pictures of me during the play on Friday, without my knowledge or consent. I explained how it made me uncomfortable and kind of scared me, since I didn't know he was doing it until my director warned me. I waited for a reply, expecting something along the lines of an apology, or an explanation how he never meant to make me feel that way, or that this was all a misunderstanding, etc. Instead, he got a tone, standing taller over me as he said, "Well, it was a quasi-public place, so I was allowed to." I cut him off again, explaining that no, it wasn't a public place, it was a private play he had paid to get into. Then I brought up that my director made a point of telling the audience before every show that film and photos of the show were not allowed, so he explicitly knew he wasn't allowed to. Getting huffy, he blew up. "Oh yeah? Well, what do you want me to do with the other pictures?" I fumbled, trying to grasp the fact that this was not the first time he had taken pictures of me without me knowing, trying to say as firmly as possible to delete them, burn them, get rid of them in some way. He immediately turned to one of my classmates, Lisa, another music student, and loudly asked in a mocking tone, "Well, am I allowed to take pictures at your recital on Saturday?" She spoke to him a minute, looking similarly uncomfortable with the situation, as Maya tried texting me, asking if I was all right. Bob finally left just as I couldn't fully keep my breathing or trembling under control. Everyone around me started asking if I was okay, my classmate Tim saying he was prepared to intervene if he hadn't have stopped when he did, with how Bob was starting to escalate at me. It was then that Lisa told me he did similar to her, taking her pictures without her knowing or permission, and just overall asserted himself into her social circle. She said when she went with everyone to the same restaurant after concerts that he would just sit down at her table with her family and boyfriend without asking. This mortified me to realize I wasn't the only girl he was doing this to. At first I tried to tell everyone I was fine and could go to class in half an hour, but Maya convinced me to call my parents and to go upstairs and tell my professor for my next class what had been happening, since I was clearly still anxious. Maya and I packed up our things after I called my parents, who told me they were on their way to the campus, and luckily my professor was in her office. She let us in and asked what was wrong, since I had begun to cry out of fear. I shakily explained everything to her, how Bob would single me out when I was alone. He wouldn't leave me be. He made me uncomfortable. He would pull me out of conversations with my friends to talk to him, and how he had been taking pictures of me for months apparently. And now I was worried things could get worse, because he got angry and defensive when I confronted him. I even mentioned how Lisa admitted to me that he had been doing similar to her for some time, inserting himself where he wasn't invited and taking pictures of her without her permission. As I finished explaining things, she said that she had an idea of who I was talking about, but first she had to go and get my class started, and for Maya and I to wait in her office. She knew my parents were on their way, and assured us the door to her office locked automatically, as well assuring me that it was okay for me to miss class that night, since my grades were in good standing, and I was clearly not in a state to go right now. My parents showed up just as she came back from giving my classmates a worksheet to work on together. My professor asked if she could send in a university cares report, which she explained were forms professors could send in to the school support team if they were concerned for a student, be it school-related or not, so they could get the proper support they need, whether that was financial help, therapy, tutors, etc. As she started that, my mum said she had found that she had had a picture of Bob if she wanted that for the report. Apparently at University Idol, my mum had taken a picture of herself and my father, and Bob had apparently been sitting directly behind them at the competition, so she had accidentally gotten a picture with him in it. My professor confirmed that was who she thought I was talking about when I was explaining everything, and she was shocked because she had seen him sitting with Lisa at the restaurant after concerts and thought they were friends, or she had invited him. She submitted the report and dismissed me from class for the day, at which point my parents, Maya and I, went into the next building to file a report with campus police, where Maya acted as a witness. Luckily, several of my classmates who had seen my confrontation, including Lisa and Tim, texted saying they'd act as witnesses for me if I needed any. On the way home, my parents said that they were very shocked but proud to hear that I had confronted Bob and stood up for myself. I didn't hear anything from the report until a few days later, when I was at home and got a call from a lady, Margaret, who was a member of University Cares, that was the person in charge of my file. She asked me to send her an email explaining everything, so she could have a record in her file of my exact side of the story, since she only had my professor's report. I did so, and a few days later she called again, saying Bob had yet to answer any of her calls or emails regarding corroborating his side of the story, but for the time being she told me to avoid him and to record any future interactions with him. It was here that my mum, who could hear the phone call since it was on speaker, told Margaret I was already doing that and had altered my schedule so I wouldn't see him. Finally, Margaret recommended filing a no-contact report. That way Bob couldn't contact me in any way besides through her without getting expelled from the college and possible charges pressed. We asked for her to put that into motion, and I was just tired of it all. I was tired of being scared to go to class, of any time I was alone on campus, of every car that followed too similar a path behind me. Just tired of the paranoia and anxiety. Later, Margaret sent me a copy of Bob's no-contact order for my records, also saying she was going to deliver him the order in person since he still hadn't responded to a single call or email. A few days later, she emailed saying he wished to send me an apology letter and was asking if I wanted her to send it through. Sick of it all, I told her to just send it through for my records. When I read the apology letter, I expected an actual apology letter, explaining why he did this, or his intentions, or wherever there was a misunderstanding. Instead, I got this, and this is his apology letter, verbatim. Please accept my apology for making you uncomfortable by taking photographs of you. It was not my intention to do that. This is the first time that this has happened. As I agreed previously, I will not take any photos of you in the future. My best wishes for your future in music. Sincerely, Bob. I was angry reading this excuse of a letter, but I refused to let this take over my life anymore. I went about the last month of my semester finishing my play, continuing my altered schedule, and taking alternative routes home, and acing every last one of my classes. When I graduated in May, I was glad to be done with it all, and since the experience had tainted every memory at that school, I enjoyed myself in Australia over the summer, getting to sing at the Sydney Opera House. When I came to see the play this fall with my friend, I won't travel to that school alone now, so I could watch my friends who still went to the school. They told me my director had made it a rule that everyone went out to their cars in at least pairs after what happened to me last semester. Lisa also no longer attends the school, having transferred to another college several states away, and is happy at her new school. This has all been really fresh in my mind, since it only happened a few months ago. I only turned 21 about 2 weeks before posting this, so it was scary for me to realize how long this had loomed over me. I figured it was time I shared this, and hopefully someone else will realize what's happening to them earlier than I did. So creepy man, older than my father, who took pictures of me without my knowing over a year. Let's not meet again.